Okay, hey, welcome to another episode of On the Wrist from Off the Cuff. Today we have another great update for you from Boulder Supply Company. A little bit about them. They're based out of Singapore and Malaysia, and they manufacture watches and gear with that super tough, stylish yet functional and always ready for adventure kind of aesthetic. In terms of the type of watch, this could actually fall under two different types of watches. A dive watch, some key common characteristics in sign language. You're looking for a diver, water resistance, typically with some type of screw down crown, something that's tough, legible with a dive time bezel, and a diver's extension is always nice if on bracelet. But it also falls underneath a traveler's watch. So of course you're going to be looking for that GMT or world timer functionality to where you're able to track multiple time zones with relative ease. This is the Odyssey Freediver GMT. This is the prototype, and this is one of the very interesting colorways that they have available. And a little bit about it, it's an all-around adventure companion. The Odyssey Freediver GMT is really their first true GMT dive watch that delivers quality timekeeping at an affordable price tag. And I said affordable, I didn't say cheap. This is going to go for $8.99 pre-order, and it will start shipping as early as actually the end of this year, around December 2022. So that is actually relatively soon, considering I'm filming this here at the end of October. So with all that said, let's go ahead, zoom the camera out, get this piece in hand, and take a closer look. All right, guys, so as you can see, this, I mean, it screams Boulder, right? Like, I've featured quite a few Boulders on the channel before. Normally they're a little bit smaller than this. I think their design aesthetic is really great, but typically I like to stay closer to kind of the mid or full-sized sizes versus getting into this, which I consider a large or an extra large size. But I will say that because of the way that Boulder really balances their aesthetics and all of the different elements that are there, it actually, again, it's funny, it's kind of in the name, you do get a very bold design flow where everything is very, very legible. And this is a pre-production prototype, so you're going to see some nicks and some little scarring here and there as this has been kind of passed around, whether it be for photo shoots or for video. This is not quite the finished product. There will be some minor differences. You're going to see that ombre fading pattern on that translucent dial is going to be a little bit darker on the final production, which is going to add a little bit more depth to that. You can see there's definitely this really cool kind of layering that's happening with the way the indices and that kind of chapter ring flow into that translucent dial that does currently have a bit of a tint to it. That tint will be a little bit darker. Also, of course, with production, you're going to be getting cleaner execution and you know, finer finishing from that perspective. Also, there will be special information that will be on the case backs as well. And I believe they'll even be coating this rear display window with a special pattern as well, and then also refining the release on the quick release spring bars here. So there'll be quite a few things tightened up, but as you can tell, this is definitely a very good look at what the finished product will be, because it speaks that design language that you know from a brand like Boulder. In terms of the case size, this is a 45 millimeter watch, and it is true to size, guys. This is not you know, one of those watches where it's, you know, it's lugless design and it tucks itself in. This is really a watch for those of you that like larger watches. It has a 14.5 millimeter thickness and a 52.3 millimeter lug to lug, and that's not counting how much farther these male end links do extend the wingspan on it, right? Which is slightly, but it still does expand already a relatively long lug to lug. Everything is going to be in stainless steel, satin brushed, with a couple of high polished highlights, as you're going to see here, which again, because this is a pre-production prototype and has done the rounds, probably won't be the fanciest finishing you're going to see, but I just gave it a quick wipe so you can get an idea. You can see very nice transition, nice and sharp there. The satin is actually quite nice. And if you guys have seen any other Boulder videos on my channel, you'll know that they're relatively really nicely finished. I will say that a lot of the ones that I have featured have been more matte blasted, and I think those look great, whether it be in titanium or stainless steel. But it is nice to see, you know, the brushing and the polishing really come together on a piece, because it's just something that you don't always get out of this brand, just because of their very kind of modern aesthetic. So I actually do like to see the brushed and finish kind of mixture of finishing and facets and all the angles really kind of come to life on this one. Very cool. So the crown is actually still a diver style crown, so 120 clicks, unidirectional. Ooh, yeah, still nice. And it's like you would expect on a diver. It just happens to have this great ceramic insert here with the 24-hour scale on it, which is fully lumed. So even in the dark, you're going to be able to read those multiple time zones at relative ease. And then also you're going to see the 24-hour scale is also mirrored on the inner chapter ring, which is really nice. So you can really manage those. And then if you want to, you know, truly at a glance be able to track a third time zone or calculate a third time zone, then you can use this bezel, which is great. So the crown is screw down and signed and quite large, just like you would expect. Some of you are loving that. Some of you were freaking out about it. I will say that me, as somebody who wears my watches on the right wrist, this large crown doesn't bother me at all. But most crowns don't bother me at all because I'm left-handed and I wear my watches on the right wrist. Actually, if the crown's on the other side, then all those crowns bother me technically, because I'm just so used to setting and winding my watches on this side, traditional side crown. So the key feature here is going to be this movement, which Boulder might be the first ones to actually bring this movement to market. It's the automatic Miyota 9075. It's a true GMT, guys, so it does have an independently adjustable jumping local hour hand. So instead of you, you know, when you pull out the crown, instead of it moving that GMT hand like most movements to include very expensive ETA and Sellita Swiss-made movements, here you're going to be getting the feature that you'll see on Omega, on, you know, Rolex, as well as Grand Seiko, where you're able to jump that hour hand. So me in California, if I'm going to go on a flight to Texas, 2 hours, boom, and then I'm just living and I'm not worried about rehacking the movement, resetting the movement. When I get back, I already know that I'm going to be 2 hours back, so I'm going to go back 2 more hours, and it's not a big deal. So very, very intuitive from that perspective, and really easy to use, and that's why they consider it a traveler's or a flyer's or a true GMT, because the way that it can be used actually is best accommodating to travel versus the other style, which is going to be more for calculating times. If, let's say, you're in an office and you're needing to call somebody, which is still totally you know, great solution, and there's plenty of very expensive watches that use those type of movements. No discredit to them, but when it comes to the ease of use and, you know, and that just level of intuitiveness in the way that it's used while you travel, it really can't beat a true flyers or you know, this style, traveler style GMT. So very nice. And then in terms of this dial, you can see it's multi-layered. Here you do have a couple of steps you see there, whether it be the indices, and then there's a higher step for that actual outer chapter ring, and then you have this lowest step, which is the translucent dial with a little bit of tinting to it. There's a lot of depth that's there, so you get that kind of ombre. There's a bit of a fade to it, so it looks really cool at that center, and then it does kind of help draw everything else that you're seeing and make it feel very multi-level, which I can appreciate. Also, you're going to be getting a really cool little date aperture there, and you can see it does have a little frame around it, even though it's just kind of a printed frame. I like that because it helps identify the date at a glance because it is really well integrated, and I like that they made it parallel to the rest of the text that are on the dial, because they do have it kind of sandwiched in between the 4 and the 5 o'clock. Also, because of that ombre setup, you can actually see the date disc underneath there, which I think looks really cool, because it's it's just something where you don't see it when you're trying to figure out the time. You see it when you want to look a little bit closer and dive a little bit deeper and find that visual play, that visual interest. Because if you're just looking at it at a glance, you're really going to be just looking at all the information that is meant to be there, staring at you in the face. And then kind of as you look deeper, you find a little bit more. And then also this fading will be a little bit darker too. So I think it's going to actually have a little bit of a nicer flow, versus I think right now that's kind of center plate and where it meets with the date disc, which is black. You can see it's a little bit more defined. It's going to have a little bit more of a blur to it, so where that it's going to be a smoother transition, which I think is cool and I think will look really, really great. Using BGW9 Super Luminova, which is great, so it's going to have that nice blue glow. Also 300 meters of water resistance, which is fantastic. Really more than enough than you'll ever need in terms of diving, but it's nice to know that you have something that's overbuilt, right? Just like you don't necessarily need to have a car that has speed that's over the speed limits, right, that are out there, but it's nice to know that when you need it, you can use it, right? So if anything did happen, you do have something that's built to a very high spec and high tolerance. In terms of the bracelet, it has a 22 millimeter lug, which is very proportional. Everything is solid. You're getting, of course, that quick release end link there. You're getting 3 links on this style of bracelet. 2 millimeter taper down from 22 to 20 millimeter, and then you're getting this milled push button kind of V style clasp that has a locking fold over push button, and then also manual micro adjust there so you can dial in fitment. So with all that said, let's go ahead, get this piece on wrist and see how it wears. All right, guys, as you can see on my 7.5 inch wrist, this wears really, really well. Of course, if I do get it real close to the lens, you're going to get some distortion there. It's going to appear a little bit larger and more bulbous than it does in real life. So what I'm going to do is kind of bring it down here and then just tighten the shot in a bit so you can get a nice idea of some of the details while not really distorting the effect of how it lays on the wrist. So you can see, even though it does have that larger size, a thing that Boulder's really good at is considering ergonomics. Look at the way that those lugs, even though they're angular, the way that they are pointed down to really wrap around the wrist, which is great. And then you do have a slight taper, so you're going to get a less buckle and link underneath the wrist, so you're going to not be able to hinder articulation too bad with anything, and it's going to flow really nicely. So I think that's a thing that is quite surprising about these Boulder watches, is actually how well that they wear, because they really do lay nicely on the wrist. Look at that. There are definitely thinner watches that are out there, but there are also thicker watches out there that don't wear like this. I would say there's even thinner watches that don't make the effort that's been made here to just have that nice ergonomic feel, to where, although it's, a very angular, non-organic style of case, I think the flow of the case and the way that it wraps around the wrist is actually quite organic, and it just has a beautiful wrap to it, and you can see all of the shine, everything kind of coming together. Those satin finishes really just they flow really well. It's very cohesive, and it's definitely a very particular style, and might not be for everybody, but I will say, for those of you that do enjoy this type of look, I mean, geez, is there anybody that does it better than Boulder when it comes to these large angular technical cases? I'll say probably not. I mean, there's a reason why they are really leading their own niche way within the micro brand market. So with that said, let's get this off the wrist for some Lume shots, the light transition, and closing thoughts. Okay, let's go ahead and hit the lights here. Yes, as you can see, Doing Boulder things. Boulder, they make, watches with really outstanding lume. This is a dive watch, even though it is also, it has that secondary use case as a traveling dive watch. You can see everything is very, very legible. And this is just a pre-production prototype, so I'm sure that the actual production units will be even better, and in terms of the application of the lume as well as just the overall details there within the finishing and the way that it's applied. So check this out, guys. One thing I do like to work in is low light transition, because you're not always going to be out in the middle of a field enjoying direct sunlight. A lot of times you're going to be coming in and out of buildings, walking underneath overhangs, maybe hanging out underneath the shade of a tree. So you're not always going to be in those kind of optimal lighting situations. You might just be out, spending time in your favorite automobile. So it's nice to see what these colors, textures, and finishes render like in less than optimal lighting, to even include some harsh lighting like you're going to see right here, a little bit more high contrast where you can see all the little nicks and the imperfections within the brushing from this being a press sample that is floating around. But that's no fault in terms of their overall finishing standards, because this one it's not an issue of it being poorly finished, it's an issue of it just being worn, right? So it actually probably gives you a bit of a better idea for those of you that really want to go get rough and tumble with your watches in terms of how they're going to look while they're within your possession. But you can see that brown, for me, to my eye, every once in a while when I look at it, it almost looks red. Like it almost pulls kind of this, especially with the blue lume kind of throwing my eye off. There's times when that brown looks reddish to me. It almost looks like a Coke style. So I think that's kind of interesting and something that you probably wouldn't have noticed with regular lighting situations. Also the dial, the depth there, you can see the way that it's playing. Very, very cool. Mission accomplished on their side, and kind of having that multi-layer approach to it, because it looks darn good. And then now we go back and we can see that's clearly a brown and black, which is great in terms of kind of that earthy earth tone layout, something that for those of you who are out being adventurous, probably in a pair of khakis or something like that. So for me, guys, closing thoughts on the wrist: large and in charge. It does feel super solid and purpose built. It might have a hint of feeling a hair top heavy, but I do think the bracelet does help it feel quite planted on the wrist. I'm not sure if they're gonna do, I know they normally will have like some really cool integrated rubber style bracelets, which they can really cinch this thing down in and reduce some of that weight, so in terms of wrist fatigue or anything like that. But I do think that the bracelet itself, as it's currently situated, does help keep the watch a little bit more balanced, although at the cost of some extra weight. In terms of model variants, it is also available in a black or red bezel setup, or a black and green. And then of course those colors correspond with the GMT hand in terms of the accenting there. They all look good. I think probably the black and green would be my personal pick, just because it's so different. But I think this brown layout, there's something in the way that it plays with the dial and some of the warmth and kind of bronze tones that almost come through on that ombre dial that make it flow quite nice. And then of course black and red, that's always a classic look. So I think they did do a good job of choosing very likable colorways for at least this first wave that will be coming out. In terms of comparable models, this again is going to be one of the first watches that are going to be available with this awesome new movement. I've only seen one other watch with this in the flesh, and that is also going to be a pre-order watch for release early next year, while this one is currently tracking for release by the end of this year. So this one is going to get a little bit of a jump, and I think it perfectly fills that overbuilt Boulder aesthetic, while it's still totally kind of doing its own thing, which is nice. So this thing kind of stands alone, even though it does have a movement that's highly desirable that we're going to see other brands release with, you know, here and there. Will start trickling out over the next year or two. So for me, guys, bottom line, if you have the wrist to pull this thing off, I think you'll have quite a value-rich and feature-rich traveler's watch that will complement, you know, most any occasion, big or small. And I think this thing's got a lot of personality, and the nice thing is it doesn't feel crowded. You know, it has the space to do its thing. And again, if you have the space on your wrist to support this, I think you're going to really enjoy it. But let me know what you guys think in the comments below. If you like the video, please do hit like. And if you haven't already, please subscribe for more content just like this. Thanks, guys.